Hello and welcome to the Alliance of Independent Authors Beginner Self-Publishing and Advice podcast. I'm ALLi's marketing manager, Dan Parsons, and with me today is...
Hi, I'm Melissa. I'm ALLi's campaigns manager.
And today we've actually got a big show, very well requested. Lots of people have mentioned things like this. We're talking about formats and how to distribute them. So we are going to initially talk a little bit about rights and how they work, and then how we can go on to exploit them. Because lots of readers and new authors often think that, when you talk about book distribution, you're talking about print books and physical bookstores, but actually that is often not the case. Melissa, you've frozen a little bit, so I'm just wondering if... Yeah, so I can still hear you, so hopefully so can everybody else. It's just the video that's gone. Had me panicked there a little bit, but it's fine. So yeah, would you like to start off by just talking about rights, what they are, what contracts are, how they loosely work, just so that people can think about the rights contextually, or that's not the word I'm looking for, in an abstract way, before we go on to actually exploiting and distributing different formats.
Yes. Okay. So sometimes when you'll hear authors or their agents or publishers talking about contracts, and the contracts are essentially you, the author, own the intellectual property that you've created, and that is yours by default. And what you're doing is licensing out the rights to use that intellectual property in various ways. So you may say, okay, I'm going to give you the rights to the ebook version across the whole world, or just in America, or however your contract's going. And you will use that to then there'll be some form of compensation that works there. So if you were going with a traditional publisher, they would then pay you to be able to exploit those intellectual property rights for a set period of time.
I'd just like to say that a book is actually broken up. You write one book, and that's the only thing that you sort of need to do at the start. But obviously, that's broken up into hundreds of different intellectual property rights. So there's ebook, audiobook, paperback, hardback, large print, subsidiary rights, and things like that. So subsidiary rights, I think they're sometimes called auxiliary rights. I think it depends on the territory and which lawyers you're working with at the time. But these tend to go into things like merchandising and character rights and soundtracks and all of the exciting movie things and all that most people don't get to. But it's nice to know that they exist, because then you don't sign them away too early when somebody asks you for subsidiary rights, when they really only need UK print in English, and you don't really know what you're signing away until it's too late, and you could have resold those at a later date.
Indeed. And one of the things that we always talk about is try to limit the license that you're giving. So you limit it by the format. So I'm not going to give you the audiobook right unless I can see you're going to do something with it. I'm not going to just sign that over to you and then it turns out you don't do anything with it for a long time. So
yes.
You can limit the format, you can limit the location, if you like, so which part of the world you get to exploit those rights in. And you can also limit the term. So you can go 7 years, 5 years, 1 year. You don't want to give in perpetuity, because that's not a good idea.
If you're giving language rights, you can give away English. You don't necessarily want to license all languages indefinitely, because if the book goes huge and you want to do a Spanish only translation in a certain country, then you couldn't then use those rights again, because you've already licensed them indefinitely. So that's forever. You want to set it to a time limit and territories and all that sort of stuff. So you've got as many pieces of your pie that you can license out again in the future. And there's a clear distinction between licensing rights and selling rights. If you sell a right, and I know that's not entirely the topic of today's conversation, but it's worth noting, if you sell a right, then it's gone. Whereas if you license a right, you can limit it to a time frame and you still own the right. So it's like renting it out to someone so that they can exploit it.
Indeed. And I think one of the things, so you may be thinking, well, I'm going to self-publish. So what's that got to do with it? But actually, when you are using something like Amazon, you are licensing your book to them for a certain period of time. You are basically using that platform to put that book out for a certain period of time. So something like Kindle Unlimited, you're saying, yes, for the next 90 days, you may have exclusive rights to this ebook. and then I can renew that ongoing or not as I wish. So that is a license, what you're doing there. It's a very short one,
Yes.
unlike most, but it is a way of licensing out.
Yeah. Now that you've mentioned Amazon, and there are other formats besides the ebook with the Kindle Unlimited stuff and all that. There are lots of other stores. What do we think about reaching readers? How do we go about doing that? And I think, from my perspective, it depends on the format because it's always very different. What do you think in terms of what's your approach?
I think the thing to always remember is people go, I've written a book, and you've written a manuscript. And now what are we going to turn that piece of creative work into? You've written essentially a creative work. And what can we do with that now? So now we can turn it into the obvious things, which are an ebook, a paperback. You may be very fond of hardbacks. You may want to do an audiobook at some point. You may think about things like large print or some kind of special premium version of the book. But each of those is a different format. And so you have to always think, how many things could I turn this one creative work into? That's a really important thing.
I think the simple way to look at it for many new authors is if you want to create just 3 buckets, and there's going to be ebooks, because generally you use a similar file for all retailers. There are digital audiobooks. When we talk about audiobooks, we're not talking about CDs or cassettes or anything like that. It's going to be digital, through Audible and Findaway and places like that. It's going to be online libraries that people are licensing. We're licensing to them, and then they get a copy through their app or whatever they're using. And then there's print, which is the overarching umbrella for hardback, paperback, and large print. And all the collector's editions and things like that. So it's just easier to think that way often because ebooks can be produced and distributed in a certain way. Audiobooks can be produced and distributed in a certain way. And with print, it doesn't matter which one you go with. Typically, the process is very similar for all of them. So you can sort of look at it as a framework for that entire genre of formats.
Yep. So you're going to have to produce, in order to get, let's start with an ebook. In order to get an ebook out there, you are going to have to produce an interior file, which is the book laid out in a manner that will work for an ebook, and an exterior file, which is going to be essentially a front cover. But it's, it's because it's an ebook, it only has the front bit. It doesn't have the wraparound and spine and all of that you would have with a paperback. And the interior file cannot just be a Word document. Otherwise, you could just pop the Word document up there. The point about ebooks is they flow. So they do this thing where they can adjust to, if I change the font size, if I change which way up I'm holding something, my reader, all sorts of things, the text has to be able to flow within that. And so it's a very particular kind of file. It is not just a Word file that we could just pop up there. Otherwise, we could just do that.
Yeah, I think the technical term is reflowable. So like a Word file, you give it the formatting and then it doesn't change. The page size doesn't change, the font and all that doesn't change. Whereas on a Kindle or a Kobo reader or something like that, readers can choose the font and the font size, and all that sort of stuff for them. So you need to have a file that adapts to that, which now currently is an EPUB file.
Yep.
Now, there are several ways to produce an EPUB file. You can create them online, and you're going to want to distribute them through first, possibly your own website, then stores where you're going direct to them, like Kindle or Kobo or Google or Apple. There's lots. And then you can go through aggregators after that to reach all of the smaller stores. So an aggregator is just a company that has an online portal where you upload the appropriate files, and then they distribute them to, say, anywhere between 5 and 200 different retailers for you, so that you don't have to do it every time to every retailer. Because it only takes, once you get good at this, it only takes half an hour per retailer. But if you're distributing to 100 retailers, that's a week of work.
Yeah.
So you don't really want to be doing that.
It's really quite important to understand that whereas it may be worth continuing to go direct to your bigger platforms like Amazon or, perhaps Kobo and those kinds, at some point, you do not want to have 50 different accounts with all these different places that can sell ebooks. And so if you go to an aggregator, for example, Drafter Digital, they will take care of all that for you. So you will have one account with them, one dashboard to look at, and it will just make your life so much easier.
Yes.
And we are all in favor of making life easy.
Yeah. So as Melissa said, when you're creating an ebook, you're going to want the interior file, which will be an EPUB, and then you'll want the front cover file. You don't need the whole wraparound for an EPUB. You just need the front cover file, which is going to be a JPEG, and then you can create the EPUB yourself online using different services. A lot of big retailers will have their own mechanism behind the scenes where you can put in, a Word file or a Pages file through Apple or something like that, and they can convert them for you into an EPUB. But they're often not the highest quality, and they're full of lots of glitches if you don't use specialist software to do a lot of this stuff yourself. They are very good and they're constantly improving, but often you want some specialist software so that you can go in and be hands-on tweaking things here and there to make sure every line is perfect. And so you could use a retailer. The aggregators also have their own one, so I know Drafted Digital has theirs, and I think Publish Drive has one as well. And then you can also go to a service like Readsy. They produce EPUBs, and I think Atticus also does it.
I saw one done on the Readsy platform the other day, and it looked really nice. So that one's good. The two pieces of software that people talk about the most are Vellum, which unfortunately only works on Macs, and therefore Atticus is being developed, which I think is now getting probably beyond its beta point, but it's that was being developed so that it could go on PCs as well. I
think back in the good old days before the really slick technology came into focus, I think I used some service called Calibre, which is an open source one, but it requires you to learn quite a lot of coding to fix all of the errors that it sort of spits out, which is difficult. Whereas these new platforms are much more approachable for anyone, no matter your technological background. It's just very much drag and drop is the case, and then you can just click buttons to change fonts and make it all look nice.
And they do a good job, and I think they certainly work very well for novels and the more straightforward layouts. When it gets a little more complex, so picture books, things that have got a lot of different images or particular layout things in, you might want to think about having a professional do your interior, and or if you're like me and just cannot be bothered to learn another piece of software because I've learned enough things. And they will use something probably called InDesign. And then you'll have someone who essentially you'll hand over the manuscript. They'll give you back the interior files ready to be uploaded.
And then the same goes with covers as well. So you can pay a professional, and we always advise that you pay a professional, not just a professional designer, but a professional book cover designer, because they know the industry, they know the genres and what sells. You may end up with a pretty cover if you go to a generic designer, but that cover might not actually sell copies to the right readers, and then you'll end up with poor reviews or no sales at all. So you really want to get a specialist in that area. Alternatively, and there are some people who do this, if they're particularly adept with design themselves, they can use Photoshop to create their own JPEGs, and some people even go as far as Canva, and that does sometimes result in success, but generally we advise the pro, because you're always going to get something much more custom built, and it's often much nicer.
And also, even if you're very good at Photoshop and things, creating a book file is a different matter, and you find a lot of people stumbling over it or going, well, why are the dimensions, what is all this about the dimensions and the margins and the something? You're either going to have to do a bit of a learning curve, or you bring in a professional to do the covers.
Yes. Now that ebooks are out the way, we know we create the interior and exterior file. We're going to not really talk about metadata today that much, because we've talked about it in the past, but you will need to accompany this with metadata. So you're uploading it online with, you enter fields in different publishing portals. So there's, title, subtitle, keywords, categories, all of that sort of stuff to make your book more searchable on retailer websites, or even more searchable on Google if you're selling direct through your own website. Metadata is also really important. Now, moving on from ebooks, print has got a slightly different pathway and slightly different formats that come into play, don't they?
So print is normally going to go by print on demand. Fantastic piece of technology, which I adore. And so the principle here is that if you order a book from me, that book, they will print one copy and send it direct to you. It will not be printed 5,000 copies of it, sit in a warehouse and wait. It will not go in my basement and wait for me to take it to the post office or anything like that. They will print one at a time, and it will never even get to a warehouse. It will just go in an envelope and go to your house. So it's a fantastic piece of technology, printing one book at a time. And what you can do is have a look at Google that print on demand production, because there's actually a little video that shows the Amazon printing process, and it's fascinating to watch. If you're an indie, it's really cool. So what you'll have here is, again, two files. You always get the two files. So you'll have the interior. This time this will be a PDF, because the book is not going to change. It's not going to reflow. It's just going to stay the shape it is in the layout that you've decided for it. So you'll have the interior file, and again you'll have an exterior file, which is essentially the wraparound cover that's going to go on a paperback or a hardback. And so this is where sort of dimensions and getting all of that quite right is quite important, and where, again, a professional will get it probably better for you, is that you've got the front, and then it's got to go around the spine, so they have to know how many pages there are in order to make the spine the right thickness, and then the back as well. So you have to think about how all of that's going to work. So you'll have these two files. You will upload both those files when you put it onto the platform where it's going to be sold from, and then that is basically, those files are just held as information for the printer. So as soon as the printer gets an order for your book, they take those two files, they print them, they put them together, and it gets shipped out.
Yes, you've got to be very careful with the interior PDF, because the size of the dimensions for the page that you give the system, that is what they will print. So you don't want to give them the generic, A4 Word document size, because you typically have to pick the trim sizes. It's called with book production. You've got to pick your own trim sizes. So it could be 5x8, 6x9, or particular ones for the territory that you want to target. That they're most popular trim size in bookshops, and you want to make sure that you're creating your book to that trim size, because otherwise it won't line up. You'll end up with words bleeding off the side of the page, and it won't be a good reading experience for the reader. With the exterior, obviously, it's going to be, rather than a JPEG this time, you're going to get a PDF again for the cover, because often printers will want bleed marks. Particularly if you're distributing to bookshops through Ingram, they want a lot of bleed room compared to Amazon. So you want to make sure that you've potentially got two different files for those, because they've got different specifications for their printing machines. So yeah, again, you can use software like Vellum or Atticus for this, but luckily for the people who like to use Word, you can actually do the interior of a PDF with Word. So yeah, as Melissa said, though, you've got to be careful with the paper color and page sizes. So it's interesting, actually, because the spine will change based on which paper you choose, and you don't think it does, because they are microns thick, if that's an actual technical term. But
many microns.
Yeah, many microns. I've heard the word somewhere. I feel like it's an actual measurement. So if you pick cream paper or white paper, the spine thickness will be different. And if you get the spine wrong, it might be fine, but the odds are that your name and book name on the side of the spine will actually be printed off-center. And while that's not the end of the world, it will irritate you as an author when it's not perfect. And it
will just look odd. It will just, someone will look at that, and if they've ever seen a book before, it will look odd to them as well. They'll just be something like, oh, that's not quite right.
Yeah. The only way you can fix that is if you get them all equally wrong in your series, because then at least they match.
Then you could go, it was a thing. It was like a
it's a stylistic
thing.
Choice.
But yeah, no, we don't want that.
No, try not to do that. But yeah, so audiobooks, meanwhile, are extremely different, because obviously you don't have a printed thing, or you don't have anything that appears on the screen, apart from another file for a cover, again a JPEG, much like the ebook. But audiobook JPEGs tend to be square. I don't know why, but Audible and Spotify and everyone else who uses audiobooks, they all really like square covers. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's album covers with music. Maybe it's linked.
I think they've just kept it that way because they want to differentiate and make sure the customer realizes what they're buying at that moment but still you'd think that the JPEG would do. But no, square.
Yeah,
so it will be a square version of your cover. So again, if you have a professional cover designer, you will say, and I want an audiobook version of that cover. They will take what they've done, the design, and they will change it for you so that it looks square and not book shaped. So that will be an important part of that process.
Yeah. Now, the interior files for audiobooks tend to be MP3s. There are lots of different technical formats and things with audio. You can get WAV files or WAV. I don't know if I'm just reading it aloud or if it is said phonetically. But yeah, things like that. And they tend to be higher quality files, but a lot of retailers won't accept them because essentially they take up too much memory. So you want to go with MP3s so that retailers can deliver the file effectively and turn a profit. Yep. Now, usually they will ask for MP3s per chapter. So you don't want one massive audiobook file that you just upload. You will want per chapter, and you give them all the individual chapter titles and all the rest of it that you type in yourself. And then you also will be asked for opening credits, which typically is the narrator and the producer and all that. All of you are said in the credits. And then at the end, there'll be a similar thing. And they'll ask for a sample. Now, if you notice, when you go on a retailer website that sells audiobooks, there's often a little microphone thing that you can click on, or a speaker button that you can click on, and you'll get a 1 to 5 minute sample of the book where you can hear, the voice actor being very theatrical and say a little sample of the book. Now that is something that you will need to put in separately alongside all of your chapters and the intro and outro credits.
Yeah, and what you want to choose there is something that really grips the reader, the listener. So ideally that would be the beginning of your book, but sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you need something that's going to give them a feel of how the whole thing's going to progress, a very exciting scene, something that gives them a hint of the sort of things that are going to come later on in the story. And also it's for them to hear the narrator and think whether that's something that appeals to them.
Yeah, I like to pick a scene where it doesn't give away too many spoilers. There's a little bit of action, maybe end on a cliffhanger for the trailer. And also a range of character voices so that they can hear all the different accents and things that the narrator's putting on, which I find that's very effective. Now, you can request all of these files because if you're anything like me, apart from the fact that we're recording a podcast right now, don't let this fool you, I'm not good at recording audio. We have somebody else to help with the editing. You can often ask your narrator if you're going through one of these programs that allow narrators to meet up with authors and then produce a book together. You can ask them for the files, or if you work with a producer or a production studio, they will supply the files for you, and they will do all of the sound tweaking to make sure it's within guidelines for different retailers.
Getting it right is quite a technical process. And again, a bit of a learning curve. So some people just go, oh, I'm just going to do it myself. I'm like, that's great. And you can learn to do that. But again, it's not going to be just sit down and chit chat into a microphone. Someone's going to have to fine tune that and correct it. I've worked with quite a lot of actresses now on my books, and, having to listen very, very carefully to the quality of sound that they're sending you, having to go back and go, this bit's gone funny. There's a funny sound in between these two parts, which is obviously where they've stopped and restarted and things like that. Correcting all of that takes some time.
Yeah. And you also need to make sure they've actually read the words that are on the page sometimes as well, because I do this. I will read a book and I will add a word in that's not in the sentence because my brain imagines it. And narrators are no different. And sometimes people don't pick it up until it gets to the author. And sometimes the author doesn't pick it up either.
And also when you're working with people, it depends how experienced they are. So just because of the way I did mine, a lot of them were actresses, which was great from the drama point of view, but they were not professional sound recordists. So the technical side was really hard for them. And then I worked with one person who was like a professional. She just did it all the time. And I mean, her sound was just perfect. I listened to 9 hours and there wasn't one single mistake of any kind. And I was like, insane, wow, that's the difference between someone who's, trying very hard and good at it and a real professional.
Yeah. And there's probably a big price difference as well, but
Yeah.
we won't go into that. So yeah, if you wanted to do it yourself and you thought you could either learn it because you've got similar skills that overlap, or if you really sort of gung ho and want to record your own audiobooks, particularly if you do nonfiction, because a lot of nonfiction authors will record their own audiobooks because they want their voice to be the voice of the audiobook, then you can use software like Audacity, Adobe Audition, or Pro Tools on Apple, and they will give you the quality that you need. It just requires a learning curve.
Yep. And I believe one of our advisors, Joanna Penn, has a book on recording your own audiobooks, because she does that. So if you're looking
Joanna
for
is very good.
some further information on that, that might be the way to go.
Yeah. Now that we know how to create different formats, we should probably talk about distributing them and not just cut the podcast here,
That would be a little mean. Yeah. So so you've now got all your files. You've got your interiors, you've got your exteriors for the different formats that you're doing. I will say, and I think we've got this somewhere as well in our notes, but I will say, take your time. Don't. I know we say it's fantastic, do all these different formats, woohoo! But it's like just take it easy. Start with the ebook and the paperback, and just slowly. It's not a race. It's just do it slowly. So
I mean, we're not doing everything ourselves, or you maybe actually, because you're quite advanced. But with me, so I'm 8-9 years into publishing now, and I've done ebooks and audiobooks and paperbacks. I'm only now moving into hardbacks, so and that's 9 years in. It just takes a little while because you've got to get your head around all the different formats, and you want to keep bringing out books, so you don't need to concentrate all of your effort onto bringing everything up to speed at the same time, because some readers will appreciate a hardback 5 years after the original book came out.
Some people just like them, and some people are not that bothered. So it's So essentially, where we distribute is 3 kind of basic areas. One is you can go direct, so that's on your site, and you would then be selling those files directly to you can do your audios obviously and your ebooks directly to your readers, so that's great. Then you can have direct retailers, so that's either going to be digital delivery or it's going to be print on demand, and so this would be the likes of Amazon and Kobo and all the rest of them, because that's going to be your online platform, and that's who it's going through. Or like we mentioned before, people like Draft Digital, where it's an aggregator who are then going to distribute out to all those other places so that you don't have to have all those different dashboards open.
Yeah, and as you go through every concentric layer of distribution, typically you lose a little bit of control. So you'll have the most control on your own website, where you'll take the biggest chunk of sales, and you can control the customer experience. You're not competing against other authors. Then you'll have retailers where you have some back-end control, where you can run promotions and things. And then with aggregators, there are some perks with aggregators where they can get you extra promotion options and things like that with retailers. But typically you have to do a sort of one-size-fits-all approach with files and stuff for aggregators, because they pump it out to everybody else, and you don't have immediate changeability powers with certain retailers that way. If you're going to sell direct, it's a little bit technical, but lots of authors have done this so far. You can either go through regular the Wixes of the world and all of those different website building companies, or you can ask a designer to do this for you. Typically you've got to set up a cart, and then a payment method, and then a fulfillment method. So you'll have a pay hip type thing that will be the buy button on your website, and then Stripe or PayPal will fulfill the payment for you, and then you can fulfill the sales yourself using a service like BookFunnel for ebooks or audiobooks, or I think there's one, and I'm probably skipping ahead here slightly because we'll talk about print specifically lately, but there's a service called Aereo, which I think is produced by Ingram, where they will help you sell print books through your own website, and they will do the print fulfillment for you. But I believe up to this point it's only for US authors, so it hasn't rolled out to us yet, but it will.
I think the selling
hopefully.
The selling direct is quite new for a lot of authors. The sort of the people who rush ahead and visionary future people have got on board with that, but I think a lot of people are still coming towards that, so that's still quite a new thing. So So again, don't kind of panic that you're not doing that
Yeah.
yet. Start with the obvious, easy solutions, and then think about how you can sell direct. I think one of the things that most appeals, apart from you get a slightly bigger cut of the money, is that you are going to be able to get the customer data, which at the moment we don't get. So if you give if your book's being sold on a platform, you don't have the data on them about how they're buying, what they're buying, when they're buying, all of that. You don't really have that information and their contact details and all the rest of it, which would be extremely useful for future marketing. So, that's what the selling direct is, a big, big interest area for indies in the future.
Yeah, so talking specifically per format. Now, again, I'm going to break it into the 3 general umbrellas. So we're going to talk about ebooks, print books, and digital audiobooks. But yeah, so a little bit, Melissa, on distributing ebooks, first of all, because they are very different processes. So what sort of, distribution hierarchy into different retailers and stuff should we be prioritizing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, personally, when I talk to beginners, I say, look, let's just keep this as simple as possible so that you're not panicking and you're not whatever. So the big obvious one to go to is Amazon. So you set yourself up on there with an ebook, and that means that's now available to a large part of the population, and that's all good. Once you've got that set up, you can then think, where else would I like to go? And again, like we said, people like Draft2Digital makes it a lot easier to go to a whole bunch of other platforms without you having to manage each little individual process. So then you can set that up, and that means you are now available pretty much everywhere where someone wants to buy an ebook. So that's good. And then you can look at, would you like to also sell direct from your own site, especially things that I think for beginners would be good. Like, for example, if you'd written a kind of how-to nonfiction book, you could then have something that goes with it that could be direct on your website, like a journal or a workbook or something that matches into it. And that allows you to bring readers over from the platform back to your website, which would be a good thing to do.
One thing we should probably mention is there's usually some slightly different branding and different URLs for the websites for retailers, which is the front end of their business, and then the self-publishing portals, which is the back end of their business. So we've mentioned Amazon, but you're not literally going to Amazon to publish. You're publishing on Amazon's for readers to buy it. What you would actually be doing is go into a service called Kindle Direct Publishing, which is KDP, as lots of people will call it. And so, you'd upload your metadata and your interior and your cover files on KDP, and then it will pump through to Amazon where people can buy it. So they're 2 different websites, but they link together in that way. And the same with Kobo. So there's Kobo Writing Life is the website, and then Apple Books has Apple Books for Authors, and they're different websites. With Publish Drive, Draft2Digital, and Streetlib, which I think are the 3 biggest aggregators right now, then you're just going straight to them. And some of them do have their own stores. So I think Streetlib has their own store, but they also distribute to lots of different retailers. And with Draft2Digital, they've just acquired one of their previous competitors, which is Smashwords, and Smashwords also have their own store. So you'll get to the stores. You'll get to the stores by going through the back-end portals and uploading your data there. Now, with print, it's slightly different. So you can sell again, as we mentioned, there's using the cart and buy-in system on the website, but that will be secondarily. First, you'll want to go to retailers. So KDP does ebooks and paperbacks. It's just, it calls the paperback arm KDP Print, but it's essentially, it's the same portal. You go to the same place.
And now they also do hardbacks, I believe. I haven't done one with them yet, so
that is the process I'm currently going through.
All the fun.
All the fun. It's very fun for me anyway. And you can also go to Barnes & Noble. So obviously you guys in America will probably be more familiar with Barnes & Noble than possibly some UK authors, but Barnes & Noble is the biggest bookshop in America. You can sell through Barnes & Noble Press is the back end for them. Or you can actually sell to indie bookshops. So some authors will, they'll distribute books through an aggregator like Ingram. So Ingram use print-on-demand technology, and they fulfill lots of different bookshops. Or if you wanted to, and this is not recommended for a new author, but you can get a small print run and fulfill to your own local indie bookshops, and give them a discount and manage that yourself. But that's not necessarily going to scale unless you've got the business acumen to manage all of that. You're better off going through retailers and aggregators where they're using print-on-demand technology. Otherwise, what happens with 99% of authors who don't do that and they just try to do a big print run is you end up with a garage or a spare room full of copies of books that, and then you have some damp in your house and all the boxes get ruined and, all the money's wasted.
No.
So yeah, try not to do that.
Yeah. And the important thing about Ingram is that they will then essentially have a catalog that's going out to all the wholesalers. So then that's where people like bookshops are going to be buying from. So I meet a lot of indies who are really worried about how do I get into bookshops, and it's quite difficult. We will give you a really good resource later on, but it is quite difficult. It takes quite a lot of work. The easiest solution that I found is you make sure your book's available on Ingram Spark, and then on your website, because a lot of readers don't know this, you just go, here's the button to go buy it at Amazon or wherever, and you just have a little note that says you can go into any bookshop anywhere you want with my name and the name of this book, and they will just order it in for you, and that will be taken care of by Ingram via their wholesalers. So a lot of people don't know that, and so they think, they either think that's a really obvious thing and they don't bother telling the reader, but the reader does not always know that. And that's just a really simple way of going, I can be in any bookshop you want. You ask for the book, they'll bring it in for you.
Yeah, I used to work for a bookstore chain, and they had that same thing where, people would come in and request a book, and then you could get it delivered in for the price that the bookshop would sell it for, because they've got their own distribution systems. They would just order from Ingram or their own wholesaler that comes from Ingram. So one aggregator that I didn't mention, by the way, is Book Vault, which I'm hearing good things about recently. And I think they're a British company, which is sort of an equivalent of Ingram, where they'll print books for you. But they've got their own store called the Great British Bookshop, but they also distribute to other retailers that you can reach. Now, audiobooks, again, slightly different. When you're trying to reach direct retailers, there aren't as many retailers that you can approach direct with audiobooks as some of the other formats. The main one that everyone knows is ACX, which is the back-end portal for Amazon. Again, they've slightly separated this from the KDP stuff. And it stands for Audio Creation Exchange, I believe. So this is a service where you can either be linked up with narrators, and then they work on a book with you, and you do various deals. You can either do royalty splits, or you can pay up front, and you manage everything from there on. And similar to ACX, there's I think Kobo Writing Life has a slightly different service where you upload your own files. And outside of that, you'd want to go to aggregators. So the biggest aggregator by far, I think, at the moment is Findaway Voices. Now, they've recently been in the news because they got bought out by Spotify. So they've got some seriously, heavy hitting weight behind them in the audio space. And it'll be interesting to see what they do over the next few years. But yeah, there are lots of aggregators in the audio space and fewer places that you can approach, for direct to retail.
Yep. When you're uploading it, I always tell people the first time I ever uploaded the files and tried to publish, essentially, it took me a week. That's not because it takes a week. It's because I kept panicking and going, I don't know what they mean. What do they mean? And I'd have to rush off and learn what they meant by, what trim size or whatever, even though most of those things had already been taken care of. And I'm like, description, what do they mean? They mean the blurb. So
what's DRM?
Like yeah, exactly. So the first time it took me a week, and then one of my latest books, it took me 10 minutes while the kids were having a bath. And that's the difference between the first time you upload your files. It will feel very stressful and complicated, but actually you'll get better and better at it, and it will become quite straightforward in the end.
I had a similar thing. I think for my first book, it took me 2 days. And the only reason I was faster than Melissa is because I set a deadline that I kept public. And then I had to essentially do an all-nighter to try and get the book uploaded, and it was horrific. But yeah, now I can do it I time myself in, it's about half an hour per portal. So if you're trying to get a book everywhere for ebooks, all the different aggregators and portals and everything, you can probably do it all in about 3 hours to reach everywhere in the world. You're on about 200 different retailers by then. And all of the metadata will be perfect because you've got your systems in place that you build up. I can see that we've had a question or a suggestion from someone saying that we should possibly talk about record keeping. This might be actually a really good topic for the future, so we'll take that on board.
Thank you.
But
also, I just wanted to say, I was at the History Quill conference speaking last time, and someone said, "Oh, we really love the podcast." And I was like, "Oh, cheers!"
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. That was cool.
So once you've uploaded the book, yes, it can take a few hours to a few days the first time you do it, but it gets much faster, especially when you get better at knowing what's coming up, and you've already written descriptions and you've got HTML versions and keywords, all the rest of it that you've optimized in advance. So you're just copying and pasting things in.
It gets so much easier.
Once you've done that, it usually takes 24 to 72 hours, according to retailers, to get on the site. Sometimes it's 4 hours. Sometimes it's 4 weeks, but it's supposed to be 24 to 72.
On the whole, it meets that on the whole.
Yeah.
So we were going to briefly talk about pricing, because I know that when you upload, you're going to come across, well, what price am I supposed to set for this item? When it comes to audiobooks, you don't get much choice, so we'll leave that.
And it depends where you distribute, obviously.
Yeah, but your ebooks and your print books, you do get to set the price. And the simplest way to start is, we're going to go back to this thing we keep saying: go get the 10 books from your category that you think match yours and have a little look how they're being priced. There are categories where things get priced really cheaply, so they're in the 99p range, and that's how they do things. There are ones that are set much, much higher. So get a kind of idea of that, and then have a think to yourself about how it comes across. So for example, I will sometimes see like a box set of 10 novels for 99p, and I just think, God, they must be really terrible. And I'm like, but at the same time, I'm like, no, I know what they're doing. This is a group of 10 authors. They're doing a whole promotional push together. They've got a whole strategy going on. I know that. But my reaction to it is a bit like, oh, maybe it's not very good then. And so sometimes be careful what that suggests about the book. To go
I think it
low.
depends on the genre, doesn't it? Because different genres have different demographics of readers, and different demographics of readers, want different things. So yeah, when you're considering pricing, I suggest that you probably consider the format first, because some formats are more expensive to produce than others, and you can price higher for certain formats because everyone does across the board. You should also consider the territory. When it comes to certain territories, you should price lower because you won't sell books in those territories. What I tend to do as a rule of thumb, again, with the record keeping thing, I've got a spreadsheet of different territories and what, according to Google, is the GDP per person. So I can work out what the average salary is and then price my books accordingly. So more affluent territories will have a higher price, and then lesser affluent territories will get a lower price because I'll be more likely to sell copies there, rather than price at the same price and sell none. And then it's very dependent on genre. So if you look at some literary fiction or poetry or historical fiction, things like that, they tend to price much higher than the average, particularly for ebooks. And we're primarily talking about ebooks, I think, in this context. And then if you look at some other genres, and I don't think there's one in particular that stands out, but there are some genres that price lower on average, some around the $2-3.99 mark, and then others higher on the $6-7.99 mark.
I think on the whole, things like romance and crime skew low, and that's because their readers tend to read a lot. So they're reading a lot of them, but often more cheaply priced. But the other thing to remember is to leave yourself a little bit of room to play, because you can change the price anytime you want and just see what happens. Does it make the sales go up? Does it make the sales go down? Does it not have any difference? That's a really useful thing to experiment with, especially in the early days when you can just see what does your category work well with. And the other thing is to leave some room for promotional space, because if the book's 99p me setting it to free, is that a very big deal? I don't know. Whereas if it was $4.99 and now it's suddenly 99p, oh well, that sounds like it's a big promotional drop. And so it's about thinking how you're intending to do promotional work as well.
Yeah, it's kind of paradoxical that sometimes you're not even catering to readers, you're catering to a sort of business to business demographic. So when you're looking at getting promotions on some of your books, I've tried to get certain discount promotions that I've not got because I've discounted a book from $2.99 to 99 cents, and then I've seen the books that actually got the promotion, and it was a much more attractive offer to the promoters because they were discounting the book from $9.99 to 99 cents, and it looks like a bigger discount, even though the book may be the same length and the same quality. They know that it started at a higher price, so this seems like a more exclusive deal. So sometimes you want to price a little bit higher, just that you can have those bigger drops, and it can say 70, 80% off rather than 50% off. So yeah, there's a certain logic behind when you actually price, and it is highly dependent on which format you're pricing. So we've talked a lot about ebook pricing, but what about the other sorts of print formats and audiobooks, Melissa?
Well, the thing with print books is you have an upfront cost. So the ebook, yes, you get a very small cut taken for holding the file and sending the file, but the file is a pretty small thing. When you're actually having to print a book, that cost gets taken off before you start thinking about how much money you're going to make on it. And so normally what happens is the platform will say, this book will cost X amount to actually print. Now you set the price based on that information, and it will, what it will show you is the price, and then it will adjust and show you what margin you're actually getting there and what actual sum of money you'll get per book. And you can sit there and tweak it until you can see that you've covered all the costs and that you're getting a reasonable margin. But that does mean that, I can set an ebook to 99p if I wish, but I can't do that with a print book because I would then be paying to have the book done each time. That doesn't sound right. And so, the book's going to have to be $5.99, $6.99, $7.99, whatever it is. So generally print books are more expensive than ebooks on the whole. In traditional publishing, they've done a slightly odd thing over the years, which still never fails to amaze me, which is where they'll push the ebook really high, and you think, I'm not paying $10.99 for an ebook. That's ridiculous.
If it's not a box set.
yeah, exactly. It's a bit of a but that's because they've always traditionally tended to push on the print books, and so that's how their thing worked out. But generally speaking, it would be ebooks, then print books, something like hardback higher than a paperback. Audiobooks are quite highly priced, and that is because it's hours and hours and hours of someone's time doing all the recording and all that technology as well.
It can cost a lot to record a studio, to book a studio as well, can't it? And you need a sound engineer, as we mentioned, to fix all the tweaks and stuff. So sometimes when you're producing an audiobook, you're taking dozens of hours of work and you're spreading it across 4 or 5 different highly trained professionals sometimes. So it can cost you, over $1,000, $2,000 sometimes to produce an audiobook if you're paying up front rather than splitting royalties with a narrator. And so you have to factor in that you need to sell books with a high enough price point so that you can recoup that big investment for audiobooks, which is often why they're so expensive.
Yes, and that's why an audiobook needs to be really good, have a really lovely narrator, because you're selling a much higher priced product, and you need to have people really, when they have that little sample of it, really kind of engage with it and want to spend that more money. It is not a small amount of money to spend on it.
Yeah, with ACX currently they control their own prices. So as the author, you can't change the price. If you're working with Findaway, you can, and this can be useful sometimes actually. So we mentioned obviously you want to try and make a profit, but if you've got a long series and the sell through is really good from book 1 to book 2 to book 3 onwards, then some authors will use a strategy where they would use the first book as a loss leader, where they'll sell the first book for $1.99, and then all of the sequels will be, $15.99. And lots of readers will just try book 1. So sometimes it does make sense to break the rules. They're very contextually based. So like I said, territories will change the price. there's also, if the book is in a genre with lots of traditional publishers, you can price the ebook higher because traditional publishers do, and those readers are used to paying more per ebook, which, if you're, as Melissa said, there's a quality perspective where certain genre readers will want to pay higher for a book because they wouldn't buy a book that's cheaper. So sometimes it makes no sense to me because I'll just buy it because it's cheaper. But some people, they'd rather buy the more expensive book because it's got this quality assurance perspective thing. And then, also there are some authors can price lower if they're exclusive with Amazon, so they're in Kindle Unlimited, purely because they might be selling the ebook at a small profit margin in some cases, but then they're also getting page reads, so that doesn't show up so much from a reader's perspective, but they could be getting lots of free book downloads and then being paid for the page reads, which inflates the royalty they get, as if they get an extra sales without actually getting them. So you can't compare yourself directly to another author because you've also got to compare your strategy to their strategy to work out what they're doing that may be different to you. It pays to do your own research, doesn't it?
It does, and it pays to play. It pays to test out different pricing strategies at different times and see what happens. And also linked to that, do not put the price of the book on the back of your paperback or build it into your ISBN, into your barcode. Please don't do that, because you're then stuck with the price that you put on it, and you really want to be able to be free to change that.
Yeah, as we know recently with increasing paper prices with prints, and you have to change the price, otherwise you start making a loss on the book. But you've got the wrong price printed on the book, so you've got to pay for a new cover update, and it just gets expensive.
Yeah.
Look at it that way. Now, we've probably exhausted everything that we're going to mention in this podcast, but we do have extra resources.
We do.
Melissa, do you have the list of resources, or shall I dig them out?
No, I have the list of resources. So the Creative Self-Publishing book, that's our really good book because it goes through all those different processes, by Orna A. Russ. Your Book in Bookstores by Debbie P. Young. So that's the one that I was mentioning earlier. It is more complicated to get into a bookstore. It can be done, and it's got a ton of advice in there, so that's really useful. The Indie Author's Ultimate Guide to Book Distribution. So that was on our self-publishing advice, and it was December the 7th, 2020. And then Can I Use Ingram Spark and KDP Together? Yes, you can, spoiler. January the 18th, 2023. But it goes into the details, and there's a couple of stumbling blocks that you might otherwise stumble over. I have done it in the past. So worth looking at.
Yeah, so they're just blog posts.
Yeah. So that is how you get uploaded, and you press the word publish, and it's presumably starts doing that in the next 72 hours, you hope. And then you think, now I'm going to do a book launch. And we say, no, you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that, because we're going to do a soft launch first.
Yeah, this won't make sense to you until you know about it.
It will make sense next month. It will all make sense. Do not book a big book launch until next month.
not on day one of the book coming out anyway, because there are all sorts of problems and things that you can optimize in advance, which will make the book launch even better. Next month, as Melissa has mentioned, we will be talking about soft launches, and then no doubt at some point in the future we'll be talking about hard launches and the distinction between the two, and that's the other stuff that we'll go into sometime later in the year. It has been great talking to Melissa. And I hope that we've provided some value added. I don't know where that sentence was going, but you know where I was trying to go.
We have added value.
That's the one,
Yes.
I hope that you all enjoyed it, and that you took away some useful tidbits. Thank you very much for everyone who's watched. And if you'd like to like and subscribe on whatever app that you're listening to this in the future, then please do. We will be back next month on the first Tuesday, I believe. So it is goodbye from me. And also...
And goodbye from me. Take care.
Have a good day, guys. Bye.
Bye.